So we're here in Pamaya, Italy at the 2024 European Summer Research Institute, and I'm really happy to welcome you, Fernando Rosas and Kordeš. I'd like first just to open up the space between you by asking you to introduce yourselves, a little bit about your backgrounds, also what you do today, and then what you brought to the ESRI this year in terms of your presentations.
My name is Fernando. I have a colorful background. I was born in Chile. I studied different things. I was first, I come from a family of musicians. So my first degree was in music composition. While studying music, I sort of opened myself to all sort of questions, and then I had the terrible idea of thinking that philosophy could help with questions. And surprise, surprise, it didn't bring out any answer, just more questions. And in my state of absolute confusion, I, like out of desperation, I thought that math could save me out of that absolute confusion, and it did, in a way. So I did math as a second undergrad, and in math I found things that I could, grab. Although they are completely irrelevant, that's what I found. So they are relevant, but they're grabby, and that's nice. I mean, it's better than nothing. And after that, I experienced an intoxication of abstractions, basically because it was too many years of just, looking to the sky and doing nothing practical. So I decided that I wanted to do something that I could touch and could have a consequence in the world. And think about just a bit of serendipity. I ended up doing a PhD in electrical engineering. That was a bit of applied math in a funny way. And and so I worked for a while in telecommunications, in the, like doing math of communication systems. And eventually I got hooked into complexity theory, like out of information theory, networks and all that. I started finding this idea of complexity. I got very fascinated about it. So then I started doing complexity theory and telecommunications. And then just out of serendipity, I came across this crazy group of people doing mathematics of consciousness. And then I was like, wow, I didn't know that exists. And in parallel, all the time, while I was doing other things, I was all the time having an internal practice. I was all the time looking for things. I did, everything, yogas and all type of meditation, martial arts, etc., etc. And these were kind of two streams in my life that were completely separate. And so when I came across this mathematics of consciousness, it felt like there was a way of preaching on this two dimensions, and which made me very happy. So I've been doing that. I've been working on psychedelic therapy as a way of also. So I have sort of these two minds, a very theoretical one and a very practical one. So the theoretical one was very happy about this mathematical consciousness, but having psychedelic therapy as a way to say, okay, how can we cash out these theories? And I've been working also on that. And more recently, I am getting more and more interested in AI for reasons that we can discuss maybe. And here in the school, I came to talk about emergence. So emergence basically is the idea that the whole can be more than the parts. And I feel that's very relevant to the whole discussion of what this workshop is.
My name is Urban. I come from Slovenia. My background is similarly colorful than Fernando's. I also started as I didn't start as a musician. I am completely tone deaf, so there we completely differ. But I started as a mathematical, theoretical physicist. I was very in love with finding the actual ground of everything, which is, of course, physics. And I also quickly started parallelly studying philosophy, which again brought no answers, as you said, but was very, very pleasurable. And then I somehow, during the study of mathematical physics, which meant mostly computer models of differential equations, I somehow stumbled into neural networks. And that connected both studies, and so that's how I got into cognitive science. I was doing neural networks, models of the brain, of cognition, and so on. But became more and more frustrated. I felt something is missing, and I figured out what is missing is lived experience. So I plunged into a new field, which for me didn't feel so new, but if I look backwards, I see that was like a diametrical jump from neural networks, computer modeling, to sitting in front of another person asking what it's like to be you. So I traveled around the world, tried to get some instructions how to do it, met all these great people like Russ Halbert, Clap, Petit-Moreau, and so on, and got a little bit into also Paul Watzlawick, who is now a little bit forgotten, but I think a great psychotherapist and communicator. And I started examining human experience. And my idea was to start empirical research immediately. I thought, well, I need a couple of weeks perhaps to figure out how it's done. I was methodologically quite adept. I had physical background and so on. But soon I realized that it's not so easy. And like 15 years later, I'm still figuring out how to research experience, because there is this very naughty characteristic of this field of research that whenever you look at it, it changes. Whenever you try to observe it, it changes. And here I have to say physics helps, because quantum mechanics has similar characteristics. And this was my topic that I tried to offer to the students and to participants of ESRI. I tried to sort of remind us that it is not so simple. You cannot just observe experience. You have to be aware that this is a groundless business, that whenever you try to observe experience, you're creating experience, or at least co-creating experience, and it is a sort of a circular affair. You cannot even pretend that there is something out there that you are researching, but you are a participant in this project. And I'm trying to figure out myself, and I'm inviting everybody here to help me figuring out how to deal with this. So.
Yeah, thank you, and to both of you. And something that struck me after hearing each of your talks over the last couple of days is that you both took up the so-called fallacy of reductionism, but in slightly different ways. And I'd love to maybe return to that, because that refers exactly back to what you were saying, Orban, about the difficulty and complexity of studying experience. And so why is it that we need to, or do we need to, expand methodologies? Remember, Fernando, you mentioned that reductionism is a methodology among other methodologies, so it's not necessarily to be completely done away with. We also heard from Marika van Vugt, who talked about the practicalities of that. It's a more practical type of methodology. So how do you approach this question of reductionism, its place, and then what's required of us to go beyond that to study experience?
A little bit of a comparison between our sort of takes on the whole affair. I think, at least from my side, I completely agree with what Fernando is saying, but I think we are talking about different sides of the, let's say, explanatory gap. Fernando, please correct me, I might be completely wrong, but that's how I took your presentations, is still on that third person side. So still trying to observe what can be observed from outside, what can be measured, and so on. And I completely agree that there are other ways. Reductionism is not the only way. And I was completely taken aback by what you said. I never thought about it, that the difference between pattern and particle is just where you look from. So to me, that was quite a revelation, I have to say. So, and there, we are trying to find, or some people are trying to find alternatives to reductionism. And I think what you are suggesting is completely sound. On the other side, the first person side, we are, I think, completely different rules apply. I think there is the possibility to do empirical research of experience, but here you are constantly treading this groundless territory. You can't even imagine that there is something out there you are researching. You are co-constructing what you are producing in a research lab or wherever you're doing your research. So these are two things, and I think they are not perhaps completely related, but they are perhaps sort of yin-yang fit together in that sense. That's my take on that.
No, I fully agree. I think they are very complementary, absolutely complementary. I think it's a good interpretation that I haven't faced still the challenge of the first person, because I'm slow, so I'm trying to first sort out some of this sort of complicated aspects of the first person, and I found the hope that sorting those out is going to help me later when I go for the first person. But for now, everything I did was completely third person, and it's a bit the other thing that I enjoy doing is that while I completely love philosophy and words and language, I like grounding it. I like grounding it into mathematics. I don't claim that this grounding into mathematics would make the philosophy and the language, redundant, but it gives me, the ability to see it better, manipulate it, use it in different purposes. So that's something I enjoy doing. And my hope is that the day of tomorrow I can go to the first person question and then do sort of the same thing there. But it's difficult. So and for now what I'm doing is just from the third person perspective, see how, when many things interact, how under what conditions, and how it happens that they can become more than the sum of the parts. And trying to do that formally with math, and in a way that can be quantified, and in a way that you can use it for something. And in that respect, as I said before, I have half of my brain that is very pragmatic and engineering. So I like understanding, but as an intermediate step of then getting something done. And related with that, and about the question of reductionism, and I find interesting the question why we look for that, and why we look for ground. And I think there is some psychological thing that we feel the need of, grabbing something and feel safe. And I find interesting to also, contemplate that question from that perspective. Like, why are we trying to go there? How do we feel when we cannot do that? I found that myself when I went to mathematics. I started going to, while I was learning, I was going to, the fundamentals of mathematics, like set theory, like logic, and it was so, the experience was so disappointing, because it's the same as in physics. Like, you have everything perfectly clear and covered and pretty, except this little corner. And when you look into that corner, it blows in your head, in your face, and it's completely, it's like hopeless. And I find that situation so interesting, that reality, what I have seen is always like that. It almost fit. It's like a circle that almost closes, but it doesn't close. So it's almost a circle. It's not like whatever random thing that is completely incomprehensible. It's like almost closed, but it's not closed. And that balance is very pretty, I think, because it lets you to understand something and to play around and do stuff, but it doesn't kill the thing. Like, I imagine the circle would close. You understand it, we're done, we go home. Like, what is after that? Like, that is basically death. So I find so interesting that the universe is sort of has this sort of dynamical property that...
But I think the catch is, if you start observing this little part that doesn't close, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and more and more and more important. And then at some point, perhaps, at least that's what happened to me when I discovered experience. I actually discovered experience. I'm still amazed reading my stuff from like 20 years ago, where there was no experience. I didn't feel like, I still remember talking to a great luminary of cognitive science, Karl Pribram, who was visiting Ljubljana at that time, and I said something, but I really don't know what. And he also couldn't help me. Perhaps brain is hologram, or something is missing. I could not figure out. And then I discovered Husserl and Varela, actually Husserl through Varela, and then this blew into my face. This little little thing, at least that's how it looked like from my perspective. We will figure slowly how people, how the intellect works, how they reason, how they maintain life functions, how they do all the cognitive tasks. And this little thing, and then this little thing becomes everything. If you just I think what happened to me is it was like zooming. Before I was zooming some distance, and then zoom changed, and I saw a complete new world. That became just a speck in the background, the whole brain thing. So now I'm actually zooming back and forth. When we do physiological research, we zoom there and back and there and back, and it's sort of a uneasy sort of marriage between the two.
I like the zooming in and out. I identify very much with that. Because I feel that if you get obsessed with this little corner, that is everything. But I agree. But also at some point, it's like, oh, we don't know nothing. It's so complicated. And at the same time, at least for me, I'm very concerned about mental suffering. Yeah. And people are suffering today. Yeah. And hopefully, in science, in 100 or maybe 1,000 years, we're going to learn more. But we need answers yesterday.
Exactly.
And in that way, and that I actually appreciate that, because that forces you to actually not lose the track of what you actually know. Yeah. Yeah. So we know so much, and it's very easy to lose track of that. So keeping this balance and zooming in and out, eventually become a little bit less discomfortable, I think.
I mean, you said really nicely at your workshop how little use fMRI scan is to a psychiatrist, And that's quite disappointing after 25 years of intense brain scan studies. And I absolutely think there will be progress in that direction. I don't think this is like a dead end on anything. But we have experience. We just sort of not notice it. We just don't zoom to the fact that we are bathing in our experience constantly. And I think quite a lot could be discovered here. Quite a lot could be also. And by the way, I think you mentioned suffering. When I do a lot of interviews, and people that come to me for the first time, normally they discover their experience through suffering or pain. That's like a reminder, that there is something interesting going on here. It's not just outside world things. And it's really sad, but still, it's like a calling card of the experience that we are in pain. Something is. I feel something, and I had troubles with my balance. So I went to my friend, neuroscientist, and said, "Look, I have problems navigating and this kind of stuff." And he did all kinds of physiological research. Because nothing's wrong with you. This is just your experience. And I'm going like that through the world, but it's just my experience. And that was the point when I thought, I think we could help so much. Just observing and learning about our own experience. And we are not there yet, I think. But I really see in the horizon that we will sort of produce sort of a school of self-examination where you could really see your experience, how to perhaps navigate through it.
And also it reminds me of this recent interest and accent in neural diversity. Aphantasia, etc. Like so many people experience their life in such a different way, and we don't notice that.
Exactly. When I talk to students, the first class of my course, first person research, I tell them, for example, I hate vinegar. I cannot stand vinegar. And many people love vinegar on their salad. Can you try to understand how it's to be like me? How does the world of the person who hates vinegar look like? And such a little thing, and we know that our friends are like that, but we never consider that perhaps they are living in entirely different universe, and of course this is just a little thing, if we just for example, if we studied how different people learn and construct their knowledge, we would see that a good lecture for one person is completely useless for another, and so on, and going towards the neurodiversity and suffering.
How do you see a difference between knowledge about experience and experience? And what I mean with that, something might a bit specific. Like, do you know the story of this? I forgot the name. This neuroscientist that is blind, that knows everything about vision and
Mary, the choral scientist.
Yes, Mary. Yeah. And then Mary, one day, gained vision, and is she learning?
Or steps
something?
out of her hole.
Yeah. So, do you think there is something similar to experience? And in that sense, do you think experienced researchers should also do experience development in parallel?
Yeah, Varela thought so. For example, there is this very clear paragraph in neurophenomenology paper where he says, I think the new generation of cognitive scientists should also be masters of their own experience. He doesn't say masters, but something like that. And I agree. But that doesn't actually answer the first part of your question. I agree, because I think one of the very quirky things when you explore experience is that you need people who are at least a little bit experts in observing their own experience. Yeah. You cannot take clueless people like we do in psychology. We take psychology students from the first or second year and use them for our experiments. This does not work like that, because you will never get valid data if you just ask people because people are not used to observing their experience. So you need, we call them co-researchers. You need people who are at least a little bit interested and trained in exploring their experience. So that's why I think on that side, you need to learn about your own experience, which is, of course, completely different from other parts of science. But how would the knowledge look like? I don't know yet. I know the part of knowledge would be a mastery in navigation through your own experience. But that, let's say, more intersubjective knowledge, it's difficult to say. I mean, we think we found, or I think people found, some things that are called invariants, some sort of patterns of experience that are quite intersubjective. That when you explain it well, people say, "Oh yeah, it's there. This is really a deep underlying structure of my experience." But this is quite a beginning. So I don't know. Perhaps there we could connect to emergent science, and I don't know.
And it did remind me, like, one of the things that really intrigues me the most is that I might be completely wrong, but when I hear you talking about experience, I feel you are talking in a very sort of cognitive way, a bit like, I observe, which is what I tend to feel with most people when they speak about experience. It's like this observer that is sort of neutral, like emotionally neutral, or, and I feel that my own experience and what I have read from people is that when they break through and they really advance in their process of understanding their own experience, that is not emotionally neutral. There is a positive quality, and that on one hand feels very natural. On the other hand, it completely breaks my head. It's like a symmetry breaking. It's like, why shouldn't it be completely like when you understand how everything goes and everything is empty, etc., etc., etc. Why you just don't care about anything? Until you care about everything in this very beautiful way. Do you have any idea?
Yes, I completely agree. If I sound like that, I don't want to sound like that. But thanks for reminding me.
It might be my bias.
No. I can see why, actually. But I would say it's not that it becomes more, let's say, high valence. Just the low valences go away. I think it's like a lack of suffering, not joy or something, but the suffering slowly goes away more you know about your experience. Although there are some points in this path where suffering increases dramatically. So it's not, I really, this is really hard thing for my colleagues and me to observe experience as a researcher, because it's so personal, it's so personal, and you can get into these abyss that are really dark. So this is the day's job of an experienced researcher. It can be quite dark, or quite, you don't know where you're going. Science is open, It's not like Buddhism, where you believe you will get to this light place. It's not necessarily like that. So, but normally, points of sort of where you learn something really new feel like you said, like less suffering, So, and of course, for us theoreticians, for theoreticians, the question is: did you change your experience, or you just zoomed into another part of experience? This is my, never-ending question. Am I, by my research, changing my experience, or I just focus to another parts of already something that's already there?
Yeah, I wonder what you think about this. So for me, I experienced this sort of a shift at some point in life, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, or it's just something that happened. When I was a teenager, my guiding principle was something like truth or clarity.
Yeah.
So I was looking for clarity and understanding things and see through things, etc.
Yeah. And not anymore.
Not really, because at some point I start getting. It reminded me of these obscure places that you were mentioning. At some point I start getting into this sort of painful truths or something like that, and I start reading some literature, some philosophers that they felt very lucid, but at the same time so much suffering was there, and because of also personal experiences with close family members and friends in very strong points of suffering, at some point I decided, okay, there's something wrong about this guiding principle. If there is a truth that is guiding to suffering, like long term, I see that there are things that are hard to swallow, but if this is just pure suffering indefinitely, that is wrong. And then I sort of switched and I said, okay, forget about clarity, well-being. And I am not sure even what well-being is, but I have a feeling for that. And I tend to guide my path towards something that intuitively I feel that is leading to well-being, and then I sort of trust that eventually truth and clarity will come associated with that.
Oh wow!
Do you know what I mean?
I think I do, but you just blew my mind. Actually, I have to go and meditate a little bit. No, that's completely intuitively sounds completely false, but I wouldn't dare to respond to that, because I think it's really interesting. It's really interesting, and because I can just say one thing. When I start a new research, we have a meditation group where we use meditation not for to get somewhere, but to see, to be as open, even if during the meditation people just think about how to fart silently or something. We research that, whatever happens, and I sort of felt for some time that looking, and because when you record experiences, you can see that most of the people would go towards well-being, try to adapt their consciousness so it's as pleasant or as quiet as possible. And for some time I felt this is sort of blocking our research, but I don't anymore. So I think here perhaps there is some resonance with what you said. I feel we just have to record this attitude, and whatever comes out of this is there. I think if the attitude was different, you would get different. If you turn towards your experience in different way, you would get different kinds of experiences. But there we are. Most of the people are there, and I think it wouldn't be ethical to try to shift to some other more dark place. So in that regard, I completely understand what you're saying, but it's still quite mind blowing what you said, and I have to think about it.
I have to say, on the one hand, it's not that I don't care about truth anymore. It's just a matter of what takes priority on day-to-day
I can see that, and this is I can see when I observe my experience. I sometimes try to see what is true, what is actually there, who am I, what is this, but same many times just how to feel better takes precedence.
Also, I think this relates. Are you familiar with this notion of what is the word? Skillful mean.
What?
A skillful mean. Like there are teachings that are a skillful way to get you from one point to another, but maybe for another people it's not skillful. So in that sense, taking a bit more as a method to things that more like this is the truth and this is not the truth. And the other thing I want to add is that for me this is very different from avoiding pain.
Yeah.
Because there are often cases where you have to go through it. But you can sort of see that there is going to be a better day after, and you go through it.
Well, this is absolutely. Can I just go back a little bit to your expertise? The question is that you pose, but what do you think? Do you think this shifty area domain of experience could be described with the third-person models? How would you do it?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think?
What I would like is to, at some point, export the methods that I've been working on in third person into something more first person-y, but not the other way.
How do you see this happening?
I mean, if I see it happen, I would start working tomorrow. I'm not sure, but I hope that there are a number of methods and approaches and even formal tools and ways of thinking that can be translated. My hope is that, I mean, what part of the motivation with this is that, to give a very concrete example, I lived some time in Taiwan, and in Taiwan I was doing a lot of Tai Chi and martial arts, and people in Taiwan, the Chi was like daily life thing. You know, you go to the store and you get 2 kilograms of Chi, like it's super daily life stuff. And I was wondering, what the hell is Chi? As many people have done. And I started reading a little bit, and people were discussing, is it another property, like it's a fifth or whatever fundamental force of physics, or it's bioelectricity, or blah, 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 blah. And I really I couldn't find any answer that could satisfy me. Like, I don't think it's a fundamental force of physics. It doesn't feel by electricity. I mean, that's sort of an intuitive way of thinking about it. Didn't felt right. And years after, when I was thinking about this emergence thing, I sort of think there is an emergent property. And I have a very specific way of explaining this. Imagine you, as a student of martial arts, you are trying to push someone. There are so many degrees of freedom in your policy of doing that. Like, there are so many points in your body that you can move differently. That is a super high dimensional space that is impossible to navigate brute force. Now your teacher comes in and say, okay, do it as if there is this quantity, there is a flow that goes through your body, etc., etc. That is, compressing the dimensions and giving much less. And the dimensions that are left are actually the ones that make the difference. So you keep the right dimensions of you're sort of focusing the student in the dimensions that make it different. And then the movement actually changes, and the person suddenly can push someone many meters away, etc. So in my view, that has causal power. It's making a difference. So it's not a way of talking. Now, but I bring this example to say that I think we tend to have this very extreme way of seeing reality, like this is real, this is not real, and nothing in between. And for me, this Chi explained in this way has like 0.5 realism. It's like half real. And having that flexibility helped me to understand things that otherwise were very confusing. Like, for example, money. What is money?
Tell me about that.
I was for years like frustrated. Like, money is not real. It's a convention, but it pushes me. Why I'm being pushed by these ghosts? And I thought I was wrong, and we were all wrong. And now I think we're not so wrong. That this is more of something similar like that actually has causal power. Like, it makes me do things that I sometimes I would not like to do because I have to pay my bills.
But I am very sort of sensitive of bridging first person, third person gap. So, for example, when you talk about Chi, when you said there are so many degrees of freedom in the body. But actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you meant there are so many degrees of freedom in my sense of body. I can move this and I mean, you started looking from outside. Of course, that's also true. If you physically model your body, there's lots of degrees of freedom. But that's not so important here. It's my sense that in this jump is many times done without articulating. So there is a sense of body. You could do so many things with it. And this is what we mean in this particular instance with like many degrees of freedom. And then also, then I start imagining a flow, again, experience, and that sort of internal perception of the flow does something, lowers the degrees of freedom within my embodied experience and enables me to move. And then you can observe this from outside as a much better pushing the enemy, a sparring partner, or moving, and so on. So you see, this is that many times this jump, which is a huge jump, is made or almost unconsciously, or without mentioning. Oh, now I'm talking about body. Now I'll jump to experience. And this thing, I think we have to be careful. But if you talk about fear, I completely agree. That's emergence. That's another. Everything is emergence, I think, within our, not everything, but for example, emotions. Ross Halbert told us once one really interesting research. They were researching experience of teenagers, and they sort of expected a lot of emotions constantly, but almost zero. They found almost nothing. But then they found this girl who was just dumped by her boyfriend, and she came home, and there was this sample of experience at that time, and she said, I felt a little bit tensed, and no thoughts. I couldn't start my thoughts. There was this pain. Is that sadness? So it seems that at that point she contracted out of many little things, constructing a new thing, which 10 years later will be one simple thing. She will forget that it was constructed out of different little things. So I think in our experience with this, we do this stuff constantly, this merging many different things into one coherent experience. So I think if you mean, if you call this emergence, I would completely agree.
I mean, emotions is such a topic. Like, I was new to this topic, and I started reading about it a few years ago, and I was so shocked to see the lack of agreement of experts on what is an emotion to start with. And it's not that they disagree on details; they disagree like fundamentally.
Yeah.
Like for some people, there are 5 fundamental emotions that are biological and naturally reactions of the body. Yeah. For other people, it's completely social construct. Yeah. And the fact that we don't agree on something so essential, is.
But that's this little hole, It seems like I could tell you the same story about decision making. We use these 2 examples actually to show students how cognitive science is not one little thing, but it's like diverse field. But I think we are completely drifting off the topic, but I completely agree. We have all these islands of experts that because they are in their bubble, it seems that they know it seems that what they're talking about is universal. They do know what they're talking about, but within this bubble, But they normally don't talk. And by the way, that reminds me to your workshop again, where you reminded us about this project where theories of consciousness were being compared. And perhaps you better tell it, because I didn't know the result. I knew when they started the project, Temple Foundation, but I didn't know the result. I didn't follow it up. So it seems that they were talking different languages, that they could not agree on one parameter that would actually be comparable.
Yeah, so that's a bit jumping on a different field.
Yeah, I think.
Shall we go there?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Let's ask our guest, our host.
I would actually love to drop a big question in right now, if you're okay with this, because it's a question that came out of your presentation and that we've been dancing around a little bit in the ways you've been talking about this trafficking between first-person experience, third-person experience. Maybe we can also talk about intersubjective experience. And it relates to what has been unfolding, but I'm wondering, so you asked the question, is a science of emergence possible? And I would love to hear your take on that just right now, based on what's emerged from the conversation from both of you. And then second part of that question is, what is the ethical dimension of that? Because you both started talking a little bit about that in terms of understanding experience as having ethical dimensions or consequences for one's quality of life, the quality of interactions, and quality of being in the world. So if that's not too much to tackle, I'd love to hear two parts of that. Is a science of emergence possible? And then what's the ethical dimension of that for both of you?
So let me start with that, and I will finish with a question for you. So I mean, my presentation, that was sort of the main pitch I was trying to make, was that I think it's possible. The basic idea is to realize that science is usually done by dividing and conquer, basically. So you have this big problem, you divide in parts, you understand the parts, and then you put them together. And it works very often and in a very good way, but often, sometimes it doesn't work, and then it's when you have to change your method. So the realization is that science is not really about dividing and analysis, but about explanation, about prediction of the effect of interventions, and about reproducibility and things like that, which reductionism usually gives you that, and that's why we like it. But sometimes it doesn't give you that, and then you have to switch gears and try something different. And the idea is that the different approaches that are not so one way of thinking is that in reductionism, you divide the thing in little parts, you study the parts separately, and then you sort of cross your fingers that the interaction between them is less complicated than understanding the parts. And when that fails is when understanding the parts is so simple that you don't gain nothing to guess the interactions. And the brain is a good example, because the neurons are so simple. I mean, they're super complicated. Like they're super terribly complicated, and they dendrite, etc. But even if we understand neurons in isolation really well, we have not done, like, there's so much more in their connection that's sort of the type of scenario I have in mind. And then my presentation was trying to argue that this is possible, to focus on the connections instead of focusing on the parts, and that there is a number of researchers recently trying to build methodologies, and one difference is that this topic of emergence has been subject of philosophy for very long, which has been incredibly valuable, but my interest is to bring it to empirical science. And the idea there is not to think until we convince ourselves that something is emergent or not, but more be able to generate very specific conjectures of what would emergence imply in a specific case. So if I say consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, what do I mean? Because in my mind, this is not specific enough. You need something much more specific. And I try to give some examples on how you can specify that more. And the idea is that if you specify them enough in a formal mathematical way, then that directly gives you a way of testing it from experiments. And I agree this is still third person, but hopefully this could build, steps toward putting a similar approach to tackle first person. Now my question to you, Urban, is when you say about experience, how do you think about, I was thinking the example of the student doing the thing, and how do you think about intersubjectivity? Not necessarily in that case, but in general. Because one thing that starts sort of striking you when you think of emergence regularly is that we are so much more together than by ourselves, that I sometimes start doubting that we are conscious separately and then we come together and we can become a society. It seems that there's a lot of top-down influences. Like, just as a super simple-minded example, language plays such a big role in our internal life, and none of us invented languages. That's completely coming from outside. So sometimes when I think of first person, it's like we need first persons. You know, and
sometimes Claire Petit-Majon sometimes calls it second person research, actually. So it's you're not the only one thinking like that. Yeah. No, my main topic of study is trying to find the ways how people turn towards experience, because I think this is how we construct our experience. I absolutely am sure this is one of the few things I'm sure about, that experience is not like just a reflection of something that's out there. So it is being constructed. And one of the main parts of this, what we call attitudes or horizons, you know, of these characteristics of how we construct, how I constructed this particular moment, my world, my experiential world, is that social part. And we do, now we are very much into research of mind wandering, and we can see how really, really often people are together with others, even if they're alone in the room. So I completely agree, and this is not probably a surprise that we are social beings, even when we are alone. When we discuss, like Hannah de Jager already told us years ago, we are constructing our reality. You know, it's if you nod, I will emphasize one part of my experience to the other, and if you nod to this, what I'm saying here, and my whole world will change a little bit. You know, so we put this social interaction under attitudes, you know, under characteristics. How do you observe your experience? How do you tend to your experience? And it's probably the most important part, absolutely. Now that we are just starting this mind-wandering research, and you can see, although it's very surprising, there are some people who have almost zero. To me, that is also a big surprise. How is it? Is our methodology wrong? We still don't know. There are some people who claim they never experience sense of others, of watching them or talking to them, or sort of, this is to me also very surprising. But mostly we are constantly building our reality together with others. So yeah.
Are you familiar with this theory that we first build a sense of other, and then we build a sense of ourselves as yet another?
Yeah, I heard that, and I think that makes quite a lot of sense. Although we are not, that's not my expertise. I wouldn't like to comment on it because that's psychology, developmental psychology, or self, perhaps, the Harvey's work. But I think that makes quite a lot of sense.
And the theory I have heard is not so much in terms of development, but in terms of like history, like evolution.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not very familiar with that, but that makes complete sense to me. But on the other side, we are studying language a little bit, and communication, the attitudes toward communication. And there are some theories that say that communication and language did not develop as we thought in our recent philosophical past to point towards the world, but to navigate through social reality, you know, to build, and I see that from experiential view completely. I see that most of our seeking, communicating, building knowledge is trying to sort of position yourself into the social reality. Trying to find the truth about the world, it's very rare, actually. It's very rare, very, very rare. And I think that was also the problem of early AI. They thought that the good cognitive system copies the world or records the world and then reacts towards reality of the world. And now we have these language models that are so much more successful exactly because of that. They are just this relationship sort of masters, you know, how to adequately answer, not how to truthfully answer. So that's why now they have the problems, all the engineers at ChatGPT, to make them also true, not just correct, not just relevant and adequate. So I think I agree with you. I don't know so much how I don't know so much about self, but I think language communication proves that point. So.
And what do you think about the body? Because as a personal fun experience, the first time I went to a meeting of neuroscience, I experienced some degree of dislike of the general view, because I felt that everybody was like, yeah, you are the brain, you're your brain, but they were brainy people. So it was a bit like, I really
modeling themselves.
Exactly. Like, I really like this joke of, there's a little rat that goes, that runs to his mother and say, mother, I just saw, and the rat is walking around the street, and suddenly there's a bat. And then he gets super shocked and runs back to her mother and says, mother, I just saw an angel. Because you sort of interpret the thing the way you are. So I felt these people are brainy people because that's the way they live, and then they extrapolate, we are all brainy people, we are our brain. And I felt if these people are telling everyone who we are, that's wrong. And also in my personal life, the connection with my body has always been a source of health. So I'm very sympathetic to the extensions of. I also think that cognitive science, as you said, started from this very brainy.
Yeah, but I think that was the progress. I think Varela's progress was brain, body, experience. Because yesterday we had this beautiful meditation where the teacher told us, this is not so difficult to get out of your thoughts. Just start feeling your body. And that, and then when you start feeling your body, you also, notice that I am experiential being, I'm experience, So it's sort of paradoxical, but I think that connection is so quick. If you stop being concerned about content, of your thoughts, of the world around you, of things. The easiest way how to do it is not saying, I am experienced, because this is more theoretical. Just observe your body. And then, so I think body is sort of a gateway drug to experience. But I think this is changing also in a very, very sort of mainstream cognitive science. Embodiment has become sort of in a very uneasy way. So, for example, now they are studying gut bacteria and their influence to cognitive processes, and now we have a group in Ljubljana studying gait and how that influences higher cognitive functions, and so on. So I think this is sort of changing a little bit, even in that mainstream, very physiological reductionist science.
Wow. So I would maybe want to just ask one more question before we close out. We're almost at our hour mark. I would love to hear from both of you, because we haven't really named specifically neurophenomenology as a paradigm. We've been talking about it, I think, the entire time in some sense. But I'm wondering, where do you think it stands today? Is it a complete paradigm, or what are the questions that need to be asked for the future of this paradigm? Because we've talked, I think, a lot about the slipperiness of trying to research experience from first, if you call it first person, and then second person and third person perspectives. But where are the burning questions for you in order to have a more complete paradigm in the future?
Perhaps I can start here. I think neurophenomenology is at its very beginning, at least the way Varela envisioned saw it. I think there was this, in like 96, he suggested we do this marriage between first and third person science, but I don't think neuroscience said, yes, let's do that, But a couple of years later, there was this discovery of default mode networks, of the networks in the brain that become active when you do nothing. And that, completely independent of Varela's sort of thinking, was a trigger to start being interested in experience for neuroscientists, because there was something that they didn't know. What is this? Because we were just studying experiences or mental functions that could be triggered by some task. But here, by definition, mind wandering was task-independent thought. So we found something that is mostly going on in our minds, but was never studied. So that was sort of a call to start researching experience. And there is, we have like weak and strong neurophenomenology, I think, at the moment. We have weak means any kind of marriage between first and third person. And this is quite big now. Mind-wandering research, as Marike told us, is quite important part of cognitive science right now. So I think this is quite successful at the moment. But let's say strong neurophenomenology, this is still in the very beginning, because I think strong neurophenomenology, as was envisaged by Varela, and as I think is really, really good way to do it, that calls for equal sort of equally sort of positioned study of first and third person areas. So third person, we are quite good in studying brain. Not perfect yet, but we are quite good. We know we have many techniques, many ways how to do it. But we are still, as we see from this discussion, at the very, 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 very beginning of third person. And I think if I had to summarize what Varela meant by neurophenomenology, I might be wrong. Of course, I don't want to put this into his mouth, but I think that's what he meant. If we want to have a good marriage, we need to enable both fields to have their own autonomy and their own rules. And we are just at the beginning of finding out what are the first person research rules. And even we need to get there. And then when first-person research is quite sort of developed and we can find what are the actual underlying structures of experience and so on, then this marriage will be possible in my way. So I think this is the first-person side, but of course I am here very biased saying that. But I think when the first-person science will actually be based on the rules that are, or epistemology that is really characteristic for studying experience, or necessary for studying experience, this will be the time when the marriage will be possible. So I think we are not there yet at all. So I think like in '96, Varela's paper, I still think finding the pragmatic tools for researching experience is the burning question. That's my take on this.
For me, let me give a very first-person take.
Yeah.
So for me, I really love enactivism and all this because it gives me space for combining the things I care about. Like usually, there are many domains of science that are very picky on what comes in and what shouldn't come in. And having a place where you can combine cognition with experience, with body, with social, with arts, with spirituality, that's just my dream. So it's so beautiful to have just the space for exploring how these things can be combined. It's such a blessing, really. Now, I think even though we might have sort of the right pieces, we have so much work still on how to figure out how the pieces come together. So there's so much to be done. I'm very sympathetic with this idea of trying to bring to closer science and spirituality, particularly because I really don't think that science has much to teach spirituality, but I think for better or worse, society at large, they listen to science. There's a language that they can, there is some degree of that you can cash out things if you put it in a very scientific way. So I think there's a lot to win if, and also, I mean, for justice, there are things in spirituality that I think they're a bit of a handcraftsmanship. So they work, but it's very hard to scale them because you need these very specific people with this very specific knowledge that cannot be really. So to the degree that you can scale partially something, I think there is a lot to win society at large. So I'm very sympathetic with that idea of trying to do something in that space. And the last point I would like to make that I find it interesting is that what you were talking about cognition and how, that people were just forgetting the experience. And AI, I feel there's something very important coming in that space because ChatGPT today does a decent chunk of cognition. Like the cognitive abilities of ChatGPT are not human, but they are quite impressive. And this is just going to keep improving. And as a society, that will have so many consequences, and I fear that people will they already start attributing consciousness because of the cognitive abilities. And then the having better understanding and tools to know when you should attribute experience, when you shouldn't, when cognition is enough, when it's not enough, is going to be so important. Like, I heard a talk of Henry Shelvin some time ago that it really, I agree so much that he say, because we don't have a science of consciousness and experience that is well developed, we tend to do these attributions out of intuition, and intuitions shift very quickly. So 100 years ago, most people would not attribute consciousness to dogs. Most people today would do. Today, most people would not attribute consciousness to ChatGPT, but after some years where people have had this, romantic relationship with virtual agents, they will start doing that, and that has a lot of complicated implications. So there is a lot of important social debates in which these things are going to be really crucial, and we are not ready, I think, and we have to get as ready as we can.
I completely agree. But can I just do a little bit commercial for empirical phenomenology? I think this is the only way how to sensitize us, to start listening to experience of others, and then compare this to the machines and see. I'm not saying where they will get. Who knows?
That's exactly what I meant, and thanks for highlighting it, because I feel that there are two types of people. People that say ChatGPT is so different from us, so we have this magical thing that ChatGPT don't have. Or people that say, oh, we are nothing but ChatGPT.
Yeah,
we have this LLM in our heads, and not we're just that.
Not yet. Because there is one thing you cannot do with ChatGPT: phenomenological dialogue or interview. There's no way. We keep digging. When we talk with actual people, with ChatGPT, you are just circling. We tried. So it's very clear, if you do that this doesn't have consciousness as we understand it.
I feel like I was not trying to say nothing different.
But I completely agree with you, actually.
But my point is that if we are not sensitive to experience, we might think that's all. And that would be a really, I feel, impoverishing way of seeing ourselves. And we should fight back.
Well, on that note, I think we'll conclude. Thank you so much, both of you, for this really breathtaking conversation, which, for me at least, as a witness to it, really braided together the empirical and the ethical, the epistemological and the social. And so thank you for offering this and unfolding this. And I feel like we could have continued another couple of hours.
You saw us. We at some point we noticed that perhaps we could go on for 3 hours.